The more you listen, the more you know. This is Good Politics with Dr. Wilson and Adam Whiteman.
Welcome to this week's episode of Good Politics. We're in Season 3, Episode 3. If you're listening to our podcast anywhere like Buzzsprout or Apple Podcasts, be sure to check out our videos on YouTube. You get a bit more there. You can see all of the clips that we're playing. Everything we play is video. Also, follow the Good Politics podcast on Facebook. Dr. Wilson throws out some cool things there sometimes.
All right, thank you, Adam. Why don't we get started today? It's still impeachment season. And what we're going to do is we're going to cover something that's really timely and that's interesting, and it's something we've never done before. Instead of look at the facts of this case or the ethics of it or what have you, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the legal aspect of it. We've not done any legal theory involving the Constitution. And what we're going to do is look at an argument that's being made by Alan Dershowitz. And Dershowitz has had this view for a long period of time. He's now actually on the president's team. He's going to present this view to the Senate. And I thought what we would do is try to inspect it. So let's start off and play clip number 4.
This is from your latest book. I'll put it on the screen and I'll read. When the Constitution speaks in clear terms, its plain meaning must prevail over other considerations. It's hard to imagine a clearer set of words than those governing impeachment.
It's clear. I mean, it's cut and dry. It says clearly in the Constitution what the rules are.
Okay, so this is the famous clause: treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. That's what you remove a president for. And so that's what begins the analysis. It has to be treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. And the question is, what does this thing mean? And there's this food fight going on among academics about what it means. Dershowitz thinks that you have to have some sort of serious criminality before you can lawfully eject a president. In other words, he claims that this impeachment proceeding actually is unconstitutional. It's unlawful. It's something that if it went into the court system, that they would declare that you can't do this. That's controversial. That's not the way most people believe. Most people believe this in terms of typology. I call it type A and type B. Type A impeachment involves serious criminality, involves a special counsel. It involves looking into, whether you broke the law and that sort of thing. And the other type B, is called political impeachment. And this is this argument is different. It sort of says, if you have the votes, you can do what you want to. This process is committed to each institution, the House and the Senate. And so if one party happens to really dominate the House and the Senate, then they could keep the president really, really on eggshells, because then they'd have the votes and make sure that president stayed really, really ethical.
And he didn't even have to do anything illegal if the other party controls the Senate and the House.
Exactly.
They might have a successful impeachment even if he didn't commit a crime, is what you're saying.
Exactly. That's what the other argument is. And the word for that is political impeachment. And to hear something like that, let's play clip number 762.
This is a person who abuses his office every chance that he gets, and then he lies about it. So we can think about that memo he dictated on Air Force One, in which he lied about the real purposes of a meeting with the Russians. So what impeachment is about ultimately is the security of our democracy. Do we have faith that the people who we elect to lead us are in fact not looking out for their own personal gain?
So when you were talking about the adversarial impeachment, this is what they're talking about, and they think this is completely okay.
Yeah, it's an argument in favor of political impeachment. So it goes like this. You've got two types of impeachment. One is going to specify legal grounds, that you're not allowed to impeach even if you have the votes if you don't have the legal grounds. And Dershowitz is going to set forth what he thinks these grounds are, and we're going to look at his argument. But the other argument is that if you have ethical or political grounds as dictated by the political landscape, the electoral composition of Congress, how the opposing party views you, the political perception they have of your acts and what you've done, that sort of grounds is okay, and that would be the type B impeachment.
But it's dangerous, because what if the other party just doesn't like the guy? They're going to probably give pushback on everything they can, or give any reason to impeach.
Yeah, here's the way the argument goes. The standard argument is that political impeachment is allowed. The thing to understand is that you are going to need some of the opposition party to convict, because you need 2/3 in the Senate. How many times does one party control 2/3 of the Senate and not control the executive?
Oh, 2/3 is significant.
Yeah. So at least there's a natural check there. So you at least have that. And so what we'd be saying there is you could impeach even though someone didn't commit any serious criminality. And that would be the remedy for unfairness there. They wouldn't be able to get the votes in the Senate. The argument is that's what's going on right now. There's a type B impeachment. Trump's going to get cleared. What I want to do is refine what Dershowitz thinks the law requires. And to hear that, let's play clip number 2.
A technical crime is not required for impeachment. For example, if a person commits bribery, but it's abroad or it's beyond the statute of limitations and he couldn't be prosecuted, he could still be impeached on that ground. But I have changed my mind clearly from 1998 as to whether or not non-criminal corruption or abuse is a basis for impeachment. I now believe it is not.
He has changed his mind. So he was thinking that political impeachment was okay.
Even he agreed with that in the 1990s. But as he continued to research this, he's now changed his view. But the thing I want to focus on, I want you to understand what he thinks is the standard. It's not that a person has to have a technical violation of a federal statute. He just said, if the one little technicality and would get a person off, but still the other major elements are there, then that is fine. So that would count. And so you would have to do a special counsel investigation, would look and see what the evidence looks like as to the material elements of the offense and whether or not a person has committed serious criminality. The other thing he says is that if there's something yet uncodified that would equate to treason or bribery, for example, selling out the country, something we have yet to pass a law on where it looks like you're selling out the country, that too would be a basis. It's an extremely high standard. So what is it, in his view, that does not count? What does not count? Well, it's this kind of stuff. You're egregious. You're odious. You're self-dealing. You're devious. You're advantageous. You're cruel. You're calculating. You're otherwise dirty-minded. You jerk around people for aid for about a month. None of that really qualifies if the acts and omissions don't count as serious criminality. That's the standard. Serious criminality. So there's no impeachment for egregious character. And so that's his argument. And the question is it true? Is whether Dershowitz is correct? Because I actually have to tell you, I'm starting to lean toward his view that he might be legally correct. And we're going to have to start exploring that. Let's play clip number 3.
It would have been easy for the framers to put in words like abuse of power, which they discussed when they decided to have an impeachment provision. Peculation, that was one of their favorite words. Malpractice, maladministration, administration of any of these things, obstruction of Congress, neglect of duty. All of these were discussed. None of them were placed as criteria.
When they were making the laws, is that what he's saying?
Yeah, you had the framers trying to figure out what to do with the presidency. Article 2 was something they couldn't agree on. And George Washington was presiding over those debates, about how they should structure this executive. And they knew that Washington was going to be president. They didn't care about him. Really, what they were drafting is for the person that came after him, And
everyone to follow.
Yeah, it's right. So they're trying to figure out how to do this office. And, they're debating what are the qualifications for office? How is it structured? How often do you have to run for office, to get elected? Of course, back then, it wasn't very democratic. We didn't really democratize presidency until around Andrew Jackson. Okay, so, and eventually they get to, what do you do? How do you remove the person if they've done something wrong? And they try to lay out all these ideas about maladministration, things that would have to do with having bad character and this sort of thing. And they don't put that in. Instead, what they put in, treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanor. And they don't put in this general concept of just being odious or using your power in a way that my political perception says is way across the line.
Now, when we look at how that law was written, is there anything that covers the political impeachment? Is there anything that would permit a political impeachment?
You're asking whether there's any sentences in the Constitution that suggest political impeachment is okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the answer to that is pretty much no. And since you've asked that, I want to jump ahead and play a clip from, let's play clip number 5 and I'll come back to your question.
My friend and colleague Larry Tribe is saying is that because it wasn't expressly taken out of the Constitution, you have to assume it's in the Constitution. No.
Okay, so it is not expressly written that you can't, and so the argument for the political impeachment is that, it doesn't say we can't.
Right, so you have to understand you've got this Constitution, and sometimes you encounter vague words like due process of law, the freedom of speech, you say equal protection. With equal protection, there are conceptions of what equality is. With speech, there are conceptions of what speech is. With due process, there are conceptions of what due process is. And so therefore, because that's not defined, the judges have to sort of fill it in. And they fill it in, to be very frank with you, as they should, and as the society sort of motors along, and they kind of keep it updated. Now, the thing with what we're talking about here is Larry Tribe seems to take the view that high crimes and misdemeanors isn't clear enough. And so therefore, because that's not clear enough, abuse of power can be read into it. And what Dershowitz, I think, is correctly saying, and now I can answer your question, is there is actually a lot of ink in the Constitution that suggests that the procedure is related to serious criminality. And let me give you some of that right now. You'll notice that the pardon power can't be used in cases of impeachment. What is pardon? Pardon for crimes. You don't pardon for egregious conduct, you pardon for crimes. It's interesting that the power that pardons for crimes can't be used when there's an impeachment. Why is that? Well, the Constitution seems to set up this idea where you impeach a president so the person can be charged. In other words, while they're in office, there is this argument they can't be charged. The argument is that there's a system in place. And the system is, if you want to indict a president, you first have to remove the person through impeachment. And if you do that, they can't be pardoned. They can't be pardoned. In fact, that's the whole waltz. Get them out of there so they can face the criminal justice system. That's why you're looking at whether there's serious criminality. The focus is criminally centric so that you can get them out of there so that they can be charged. By the way, presidents can be charged if they lose election and are no longer presidents and there's no statute of limitations violations. I mean, so they can be they can otherwise be charged once they're out there. But the impeachment thing is for getting them out there right now so they can be charged. That's the argument. And to hear Larry Tribe's version on that, as indicated from Dershowitz, play clip number 10.
Just an example of how scholars change their mind. My friend and colleague Larry Tribe, when Clinton was president, said that a sitting president couldn't be prosecuted. But when Trump became president, suddenly Tribe said he could be.
There's another piece of text here. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualifying from holding the office of trust. They talk about impeachment as being a trial. In fact, in Article 2, it says the trial of all crimes, except in cases of impeachment, shall be by jury. So the Constitution talks of the trial of a crime being in the Senate. And then it says, oh, by the way, when you're convicted, this doesn't mean you go to jail. It means you get removed and can't run for election again. The theory being that now you can be indicted right away. That's the way that the waltz is conceived to be. All right, so you have something focused on serious criminality, the point being to remove the person so that then they could be indicted. That's the theory of what these words mean. And I'm just trying to tell you there's a lot of ink here that suggests the Dershowitz view is rather interesting. Let's do this. The one thing I want to focus on, and this is what cinches it for me, this is actually what does it for me, because this is a long debate. The scholars have been on various views. The political impeachment side has been winning. That's been the view. But I have to tell you, I am now switching to the Dershowitz view, and this, Adam, is the reason why. I think I found the key evidence. I've had a moment of clarity. When the president runs for election, what do you do if the electorate chooses him or her? For example, let's suppose Trump would be removed, but the electorate would have chosen him or her. What is the election for? Isn't the bad character thing supposed to be supportive of democracy in the state? In other words, is this an argument in favor of democracy? I thought they said impeachment was there to protect democracy. The interesting thing here is a lot of these things that you say, oh, you're not using your power the right way. You're doing things, I don't like what you're doing on this phone call. These really are matters that belong in the election, and that the electorate would render a verdict on that.
Right. Like if we don't like what Trump is doing, then we wouldn't vote for him.
Yes, exactly. To emphasize that point, let's hear clip number 11.
For Democrats, the risk is that they look a bit hypocritical, frankly. One of their strongest arguments in favor of proceeding with impeachment in 2.5 months was that they needed to act urgently, quickly, because the president was trying to undermine the 2020 elections. By not sending up the articles of impeachment, they seem to be saying, in fact, they may not need to act urgently.
So acting urgently, they're trying to rush before the election happens.
Listen closely to what they say. They're impeaching during an election year, theoretically to remove the person so that the voters can't vote for them. And why? because this person is meddling in the election. Well, think about this. When was Richard Nixon impeached? In the second term. Why? He meddled in an election. He meddled in an election, and they had the impeachment after the election. Okay? Same way, Bill Clinton didn't meddle in an election, but Bill Clinton's impeachment was in the second term afterward. Trump was said to meddle in the first election. Remember the Russia collusion? When did they do that impeachment? After the election. And they did the Mueller report. The Mueller report came in. It looked like, well, there's not enough here to go with. And so now the claim is, if he's meddling in this election, according to their political perception, the right way to do this is to do it after the election, because otherwise, what is the election for? The argument is this. You threw Nixon out, you were going to successfully throw Nixon out because what he did during the election amounted to serious criminality. It's almost like an official throwing a flag on the football field and saying, okay, 15-yard penalty, replay the down. It's like that sort of logic. You know, if a person doesn't do any crime and you don't like what the person's done in the election, you have to tell me why the person is not election worthy for the office. If the voters would vote for that, then I think that you've got a problem. I think that's what the issue is. You notice the Constitution specifically says that judges have to serve during good behavior. It's not for the president. The president only has to be 35 years, has to be a citizen, serves for 4 years, and then is forced to run for election again. The judges serve for much longer terms, actually during good behavior. They have to behave good. There's no character requirement for the presidency. In fact, they specifically had those words available to them and took them out. They put only in high crimes and misdemeanors.
Just like how, okay, so that was some of what Dershowitz was talking about just a moment ago.
Right, exactly. And so let's hear Dershowitz on this, on the timing, clip number 7.
Both Hamilton and Madison were very fearful of giving Congress too much authority and turning our republic into a parliamentary democracy in which the president served at the will of Congress. Those were Madison's words, the will of Congress. And so after they decided to have an impeachment provision, which was much debated, they then decided on what the criteria would be. And the criteria were all criminal or criminal-like.
He was afraid that it would end up, parliamentary. I guess that's the exact word for it.
Right. And so
if Congress ended up with too much power, okay, jumping back to our last episode, you were talking about, does the president have equal power with Congress where it's 50-50, or should the president be checked by Congress?
All right, so that's a fantastic point that you bring that up from the prior show. You're right about this. You've got these two different views out there. I called them in a prior show, Madisonians versus Hamiltonians. Some people read this Constitution and they think Congress is the boss. Other people read the Constitution and they say, no, these branches are equal. If they're equal, then if the president has a certain sphere of power, the Congress can't intervene and can't take it away. The one thing Dershowitz is saying is a lot of these people who like political impeachment, they tend to like this parliamentary design. In parliamentary systems, the Congress is the boss, and they can do things like do votes of no confidence if the leader is odious. And what's interesting there is they call for elections. You notice in America, we don't call for elections. They're done like clockwork every 4 years.
Right.
If you don't like a president because a president has poor character or is odious or is self-dealing or is doing tricky things that don't amount to serious violations of the law, then here's what the remedy is. The remedy is twofold. Number one, there are elections every 2 years. It's like clockwork. Every 2 years, America has an election. That's the point. So you have a midterm election, and in comes the opposite party. That begins to check the president and this makes him subject to impeachment. And every 4 years, also, and another 2 years go by, the president has to run again. And so that's how this system seems to handle it. Another thing that Dershowitz says is that this political impeachment thing is really going to open up a Pandora's box. And to hear that, let's play clip number 9.
I'm an advocate, not a witness. And I'm advocating against impeachment. I think it would create a terrible, terrible precedent for future presidents if we were to weaponize the impeachment provisions of the Constitution and apply them to any president who was accused of abusing his power. That would have included Adams, Jefferson, Lincoln, Roosevelt, you name it.
Yeah, it'll become weaponized. Any time that, depending on the political makeup, I forget the word for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting what you say. The one thing I want to say is just to think, for listeners, just to think of something simple. How many times does one party say that a president is going too far, abusing power. People thought that about Roosevelt for sure. But what about Teddy Roosevelt? Teddy Roosevelt completely transformed the entire institution. People thought Lincoln went too far. People thought John Adams went too far. I mean, there are all kinds of things. So the argument that you're using your power too much really needs to be checked by the law and by the criminal law, and also the civil law as well. I mean, even in withholding the aid, there's a contest about whether it violated the Empowerment Control Act or not. They're not even sure. So, I mean, there's two views on that. And so this is clearly not something that amounts to serious criminality. So I think that's kind of a very interesting point, and I think it would create a interesting problem going down the road. Let me do this. The other thing to talk about is the way politics is today. You know, politics is nasty today. If the situation were reversed, I think the Republicans would be doing the same thing. You know, the Republicans really tried to do the same thing to Clinton. The difference there is they pretended to use a Type A version. They pretended to use the Type A version.
Which was the Type A, Type B? Which was which?
Type A is where you have special counsel, Ken Starr. There's an investigation, and someone says, oh, you have committed a serious crime. What's the crime? You committed perjury.
It's an actual crime. Type A is real solid crime.
The problem with that theory was it seemed to be pretextual. They were looking for a legal basis to get an advantage on their opponents. So as I always thought that was a very political impeachment, but not in form, only in function. It was hiding. The politics was hiding behind this veneer. With this one, the veneer is stripped away. It's just simply, you're odious. We think you're abusing power. We don't like this phone call. We think that you're doing this and that. The other thing that's interesting, I want to go back to this one point. Democrats think that he's meddling in the election. The one thing I want to do this to you. Let's imagine that it's true that there's nothing there for the Biden thing, that the Burisma and the two different versions, the firing of Shokin, let's imagine there's nothing there. And because that's one of the things you hear people say. People basically say this. They say, well, if CNN won't cover it, there's nothing there. You know, that kind of argument. That's a crude reduction, but honest to God, it's not all that far removed from what they say. You know, there are these two counts, and the one people want to say, it's not in accredited media.
CNN won't cover it.
Well, we might later on, not in this show, we are going to look at these media bias claims. I'm working on a media bias show. It's going to be so good when I get all the material done. But you have these people saying the accredited media aren't covering it. Okay, so why? Because it's frivolous. Okay, so put that together. All right, Adam. If you are conspiring to steal an election, meddle in an election by chasing a ghost, who does that? I mean, if he was chasing Casper the Ghost, wouldn't you say, "Gosh, how is that hurting democracy?" So you want to remove the people aren't allowed to vote for it now because.
So if there's nothing against Biden,
if there's nothing there, then what are you worried about?
Yeah.
So the issue is here's what I think: there is something there, and there is something there, and this is opposition research. And to be honest with you, the Democrats might have some legitimate claim that. They're the ones that are subject to these opposition research claims that are coming from foreign lands. It was the Russians who hacked into the DNC server, and so my argument on this is very simple. The hack on the DNC server did not affect the outcome against Hillary. It was really probably what James Comey did, and that the DNC can protect itself from two-factor identification. You have the means to protect yourself. In this case here, it's not meddling because they're just trying to vet a situation that Trump believes hasn't reasonably been vetted, and it means there either is something there or there either isn't. And if there is, they're allowed to use it as much as the other people are allowed to try to get at his tax returns and everything else. So it doesn't seem to me that this is something where this doesn't seem to me that it's impeachment worthy. And I have to tell you, I have started to believe that Alan Dershowitz, I think, is correct. I don't believe that this is what this process is for.
Don't they always do that? I mean, don't even attorney generals and senators or whoever else is running for an office, they try to find dirt on any opponent that might be standing in their way, right?
Opposition research is used by everyone. And the norms for getting it are that as long as it's lawfully gotten and as long as it's truthful.
Yeah.
You don't want, one of the things you can't break a law to get the opposition research. And secondly, you don't want to have misinformation put in there.
Slander, libel.
Well, you could have someone from one of these countries, whether it's Ukraine or Russia, purposely concoct false things. So if that was the case, that would be a serious problem. So as long as it's truthful and lawfully gotten, then it seems not to be that big of a deal. I would argue to you it's actually better for democracy. The one thing I will say is the norms for getting opposition research seem to be changing. I mean, they're now going abroad. They're involving foreign countries. And so this is an interesting thing that the norms are changing. It seems to me it would be nice to have an opposition research campaign law. We don't really have one, I don't believe. And it would be interesting if bipartisan we could draft one. But the interesting thing is that I think Dershowitz is fundamentally right, that this impeachment really isn't what I believe the framers wanted with this provision.
This was a really insightful and in-depth episode here, Dr. Wilson. Thank you. So tune in next time. We've got lots of stuff. Yeah, lots of new content coming hot off the press. Check back often. Turn those notifications on if you're on YouTube. Hit subscribe. You'll hear the latest as soon as it comes out.
All right. Thank you, Adam.
Politics without allegiance. You're listening to Good Politics with Dr. Wilson and Adam Whiteman.